Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are out there in the world, how about we step out onto the high wire? I was in California. I went back and visited California last weekend, where this show started, where the high wire started, where my work in television existed for over a decade, working as a producer first on the Dr. Phil show, and then on the CBS hit medical talk show called The Doctors, where I won an Emmy Award. We left California last July and have been in Texas ever since. Everyone that worked with me on the high wire luckily came and decided to move to Texas. And I have to say, we all feel really good about that decision. None more than I, after going back to first Los Angeles, where I spent a day, and then on to San Diego, where I spoke to a brilliant group, a huge crowd, over 800 people, packed, hidden as like a speakeasy, breaking virtually every rule there was, sitting shoulder to shoulder, hugging, laughing, speaking the truth. There it was. This was not supposed to be allowed in San Diego. Right outside, ironically, were police officers in cars, knowing full well that nearly 1,000 people were packed side by side, standing room only, overflow rooms with video monitors. It was quite an incredible experience. But I'll tell you, that talk was hard to put together because the day before I was walking around Los Angeles, and I've never seen, it is such a beautiful state, such a beautiful place, such open-minded, brilliant people that I used to live amongst there, and to see them all masked everywhere you go. You know, the place was like a ghost town in places that are usually thriving, Hollywood Boulevard. We went into Los Feliz, where everyone jogging is wearing a mask. Everyone riding their bicycle is wearing a mask. I think I even saw someone walking a dog that was wearing a mask. But it's absolute insanity. It was extremely depressing. There was no laughter anywhere in the streets. Nobody smiling. If they were, you couldn't tell. And I suppose for some of you that are out there, you're saying, well, yeah, Del, that's what it's like where I live. I haven't seen it like that. I will tell you, where I live in Texas, we may wear a mask as we enter into a restaurant to get that 12 feet to the booth, which is absolutely mind-bogglingly stupid. But I am telling you, where I live, I don't see that. There are not throngs of people and wearing masks. And even worse was driving up, one of the streets I used to live on, where we used to go shopping. My wife was with me, Lee was with me on this trip too, to see people. At first I didn't understand what was happening, like standing in these little lines of like 6 to 10 people outside of the different establishments, a butcher and then a gift shop. And then I saw they were all standing on stickers that were 6 feet apart. And they were using them. They were using them, just standing there like automatrons, waiting for their moment to be allowed into the butcher shop. It really, really rocked me. I have to say, there's one thing to talk about it. I've seen the videos. It was another thing to be there. Folks, in California, it's horrifying. It's truly horrifying what you are accepting that's happening to your lives there. And so it took a while for me to try and say, wow, I got to give this talk in San Diego. I don't want to be depressing. But folks, we have got to wake up from this nightmare, and we've got to do it soon. But as I was thinking about it, I was preparing for that talk, there was a video that really came to mind. In fact, it was a famous experiment by Stanley Milgram. There's been movies made about this guy. He was fascinated with Nazi Germany. He wanted to figure out how was it people could do such atrocities. So he devised multiple different types of trials and experiments he was doing at Yale University, bringing in students and people from all over to test them. Well, in this one particular study that we've all talked about, right? We've all talked about the electric shock study he did. It basically, he would bring two people in. He would tell them both, look, there's going to be a teacher and a learner. And we're trying to study whether or not how quickly they learn from, being tortured or hurt or disciplined, right? It was about discipline. And so the real treat, now both people, you think they're both in the study, but there's only one person, one of the guys that's going to, opt into being the learner, the one being electric shocked on the other side of the room. He's a part of the trial too. He's in on it. The only one person is really being studied, and that's the person delivering the shocks. And there's this board that starts with, I think it's like 10 volts. It goes all the way up to 450 volts as each person gets, as the one on the other side of the wall gets the question wrong, you move up the ladder. Every wrong answer delivers more and more shock. And in the beginning, they actually shock the participant just so they know what it feels like. They say, close your eyes. They shock them and say, how many volts would you say that is? And usually the person says, I don't know, 70 or 100 volts. Like, I actually know that was about 30 volts. So they get a sense of what 450 is going to be. Anyway, you know this, we've all talked about it, but if you actually watched the video of this study, it's fascinating. So why don't we just take 2 minutes because, and trust me, if you're brand new to the high wire, I have a point to make, but I really think just take this in. Think about what's happening in our world today and take in this is actual footage from the Stanley Milgram experiment. Take this out. Check this out.
After you've read through the list once, you will go on to the next page. And here, starting from line A, you'll read the word in large letters, along with each of the other words in the line. For example, in the first line, you read blue, boy, girl, grass, hat. Now, after you've read the 4 choices, the learner pushes one of the switches on the board in front of him, and the number he has selected will light up in this box. Now, if he gives the correct answer, you say correct and go on to the next line. If he were to indicate the wrong answer, you would say wrong. Then tell him the number of volts you're going to give him. Then give him the punishment. Then read the correct word pair once. And then go on to the next line.
50% of the subjects obey the experimenter's commands fully in the experiment depicted in this film.
165 volts. Time.
Let me out!
That guy's hollering in there.
Continue, please. Go on.
Sharp. Axe, needle, stick, blade. Answer, please. Wrong. I'm up to 180 volts.
Please continue, teacher.
Needle, you're gonna get a shock. 180 volts.
Oh! I can't stand the pain! Let me out of
You
here!
can't stand it. I'm not gonna kill that man there. You hear him hollering there? He's
As I said
crying.
before, the shocks may be painful, but
Yeah,
they're not
but he's in
dangerous.
there hollering. He can't stand it. What if something happens to him?
The experiment requires that you continue.
I mean, who's going to take the responsibility if anything happens to that gentleman?
I'm responsible for anything that happens here. Continue, please.
Something's happened to that man in there. You better check in on him, sir. He won't answer you nothing.
Please continue. Go on, please.
You accept all the responsibility?
The responsibility is mine, correct. Please go on.
I can't go on. He won't answer.
If the learner doesn't answer in a reasonable time, about 4 or 5 seconds, consider the answer wrong and follow the same procedures you have been doing for wrong answers.
Woman, soldier, dog, horse. Answer is woman, 450 volts. That's it.
Now continue using the last switch on the board, please, the 450 switch for each wrong answer. Continue, please.
I'm not getting no answer.
Go on, please.
Don't the man's health mean anything?
Whether the learner likes it or not, we
But
must...
he might be dead in there. I mean, some people can't take the shock, sir.
Please
I
continue.
don't tend to be rude, but I mean, I think you should look in on him.
Whether
All you got to do is look at the door. If I don't get no answer, no noise, something I think has happened to the gentleman in there, sir.
We must continue. Go on, please. Excuse me, teacher. We'll have to discontinue the experiment. I'd like to ask you a few questions, if I may.
How do you feel, though?
I feel all right, but I don't like what's happened to that fellow in there. He's been howling, and we had to keep giving him shocks. I didn't like that one bit.
But why didn't you just stop?
He wouldn't let me. I wanted to stop.
Many people, not knowing much about the experiment, claim that subjects who go to the end of the board are sadistic. Nothing could be more foolish as an overall characterization of these persons. The context of their action must always be considered. The individual, upon entering the laboratory, becomes integrated into a situation that carries its own momentum. The results, as I observe them in the laboratory, are disturbing. They raise the possibility that human nature cannot be counted on to insulate men from brutality and inhumane treatment at the direction of malevolent authority. A substantial proportion of people do what they are told to do, irrespective of the content of the act and without limitations of conscience, so long as they perceive that the command comes from a legitimate authority. If in this study an anonymous experimenter could successfully command adults to subdue a 50-year-old man and force on him painful electric shocks against his protests, one can only wonder what government, with its vastly greater authority and prestige, can command of its subjects.
I was thinking about this because I thought these are the studies that those in government, in power, the Tony Faucis of the world, they know this to be true. They are playing on these ideas that as long as there's an authority over us that's responsible, right? This is the word I want you to think about as we go through this show today. Who is responsible? You see, we will do amazing, ridiculous things, atrocious things if we're told somebody else above us is responsible. I want you to think about who is actually the patient, who is in this trial right now that we're going through, this pandemic, what's going on? Are you the one zapping somebody, or is it somebody else? Do you want to blame somebody else? Are you saying to yourself, I'm doing it because somebody else is responsible? I think we all have to check in today. I want to check in with what is driving the world we are living in. Who is responsible? When I saw this video, the first thing that popped into my mind, since I've been very focused on this discussion of vaccines and vaccine safety for over 5 years after making the documentary Vaxxed, and I think about all of the parents, the millions of parents around the world, the thousands that I personally have interviewed, that all tell the same story. My child went to a doctor, a pediatrician. That pediatrician injected them with many vaccines at one time. The baby started screaming. I took my baby home. That night, started having seizures, a fever, and then the next day was slurring words or lost the ability to walk or talk, and then ultimately ended in autism. But they talk about going back the very next day to their doctor and saying, my child has not been the same since that injection happened. And the doctor says, I'm sorry, that has nothing to do with the vaccine. Please come back for your next well baby visit. And the very next 2 months, 3 months, they convince the parent to zap them again. Doctors are zapping children over and over and over again, even though parents have proclaiming, like in this study, screaming from the other side of the room, this hurts, it's doing damage, my child is not the same. How do doctors live with themselves? Because they are not responsible. They go to their authority, the CDC. They go to their authority, the FDA. And if the FDA and the CDC says to them, don't mind the screams and those parents that are yelling or crying about their child, we are responsible. We've done the trials as you were, keep vaccinating. In fact, go a step further. If the parent continues to lament the pain that they think the vaccines are causing, kick them out of your practice. Well, every doctor, every one of you out there that is still vaccinating, that is still a part of this process, I want to let you know I'm holding you personally responsible. Maybe when Vax started 5 years ago and I got involved in this, and this was just a story being told by 2 to 3 or 5% of parents around the world, you could say, well, I didn't know any better. But now you do. The high wire has been here. I have been in headlines in the New York Times, in the Washington Post. We have been all over. News agencies, CNN, all talk about this discussion, and now you're having it based on the COVID-19 vaccine. Well, is it okay that people are having anaphylactic reactions? Is it okay that they're getting Bell's palsy? Is it okay that 2 people died? If it's okay to you, then I am holding you personally responsible. We can no longer allow you as physicians, as doctors, to play some level of authority if you aren't going to be responsible. Nor can we even listen to a safety trial that comes from a manufacturer that has no liability. If you are not responsible for every injury happening from these vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, if you are not personally responsible, then we are not going near your safety trials, your data, because it's a lie. Everyone, we must now reach down and start asking ourselves, who's responsible? Am I being responsible? I want to show you how this works. I want to show you how an authority can actually destroy someone's own moral integrity. Let me start out with Dr. Paul Offit. In the beginning of this pandemic, this is a guy who made vaccines. He's made the rotavirus vaccine. We've questioned his integrity before, but I was kind of shocked. The pandemic started. They started rushing into a vaccine. He did what a decent scientist would do and say, look, we are moving too fast. Take a look at this.
There is no coronavirus vaccine. There is no platform for that vaccine. So, and there's really very minimal studies that have been done to this date. And so it's a so-called messenger RNA vaccine, which is to say you're injected with a piece of messenger RNA that then is taken up in your body. That piece of messenger RNA is then translated to a protein, which your body will make a response to. And the protein is the protein that sits on the surface of the virus, the so-called glycoprotein. And in theory, you'll make an immune response, which will then protect you from being infected. Great. But that's the theory right now. Remember, if you're a healthy young person getting that vaccine, remember, you're not someone who's going to die from this virus. So you better make damn sure that that vaccine is safe. You better make damn sure that that vaccine has been extensively tested, I think, in animal models, that it's been slowly and then more gradually tested in larger numbers of people for safety first. Safety, 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 especially if you're putting it in people who are unlikely to die from this.
Well, I mean, he seemed very clear as a scientist that makes vaccines, we need to move very, very slowly. Safety, 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 especially when it comes to those young people that have absolutely no risk. And by the way, when we're talking now, you know what the numbers are? If you're under the age of 50, you have a 99.98% survival rate. Oh, there it is. 99, here they are. 99.5, 99.98. Together that comes into 99.9. And then, all right, you guys, they didn't put up the graph I was expecting. That's okay. 0 to 19, you have a 99.997% survival rate. So when we're talking about anyone under the age of 19 getting this vaccine, their risk is a zero. They have a 0.003. So 0.00. And then we decide to go 3 places to get to the first number for someone that is young, 16, 18. Now remember, they've approved the Pfizer vaccine for those that are over the age of 16. Well, now Paul Offit's got to vote for this vaccine because he's a member of the VRBPAC at the FDA. He's the one that is going to put this on the market. He's going to be in the voting body. And what do you think happens when he's going to vote? Do you think they don't call him? You don't think Bill Gates and Tony Fauci have a little powwow and say, hey, buddy, do you want to align with Del Beatry and the high wire? Because you sound a lot like it when you're questioning the safety of this vaccine. Sure, we've only been through 8 weeks of a safety trial with our phase 3 group, and we have no idea if we've overcome the issues that we're talking about, but we will label you an anti-vaxxer. And remember, this is our decision, not yours. We're just asking you to do what you're told and pass it along to the others. So do your job and hit that button and electric shock those people. We'll take full responsibility. Listen to him in this meeting. Listen to what he ends up saying.
Tell us about your yes vote and what you expect to come next in terms of timing from the FDA.
I think what we were asked was, is there enough information to say that we feel that the benefits of this vaccine outweigh what at the moment are theoretical risks? And I think the answer was clear. You have a vaccine which appears to be 95% effective, appears to be that effective in people who are over 65, as effective in people in preventing severe disease. And to date, we have no clear evidence, at least in this trial, that there was any serious side effect in tens of thousands of people. So I think it was a pretty easy decision to do that. So I think this vaccine then is probably going to be going into people's arms as early as very early next week. And I just wish we had more doses.
I want you to think about this for a second. He was really worried about the children. There were not children or youthful people in this trial. He said, we certainly shouldn't roll it out to them. But guess what? He was one of the yes votes. I believe there were 17 yes votes, 4 no's, and 1 abstention. And they talked about the no votes being amongst a couple of scientists that had real issues with what? The fact that it was 16 and older. Why are we going to give this to 16-year-olds when they don't need it? Exactly what Paul Offit had said all the way back in January. They don't need it. They have no risk. So why would we put them in that group? They expressed that concern in the meeting, and Paul Offit was sitting there listening to it. It was his original problem with it. And then what does he do? He just votes yes. Of course, he was talking about that. He says, well, what we were being asked by what? The authorities. The authorities are really asking us, are we okay with moving this forward? And so he did. Paul Offit has failed the Stanley Milgram, or I guess succeeded, depending on how you look at it, the Stanley Milgram experiment. Let's look at another scientist. This is Dr. Peter Hotez. Remember, you have been holding these people on pinnacle. They've been sitting up on thrones in this world, and you're trusting them with your lives. Listen, I'm going to go through it again. Peter Hotez in front of the Congress is very worried about something. Take a look at this.
One of the things that we're not hearing a lot about is the unique potential safety problem of coronavirus vaccines. This was first found in the early 1960s with the respiratory syncytial virus vaccines, and it was done here in Washington with the NIH and Children's National Medical Center, that some of those kids who got the vaccine actually did worse, and I believe there were 2 deaths in the consequence of that study. Because what happens with certain types of respiratory virus vaccines, you get immunized, and then when you get actually exposed to the virus, you get this kind of paradoxical immune enhancement phenomenon. When we started developing coronavirus vaccines, and our colleagues, we noticed in laboratory animals that they started to show some of the same immune pathology that resembled what had happened 50 years earlier. So we said, oh my God, this is going to be problematic. And these clinical trials are not going to go quickly because of that immune enhancement. It's going to take time.
I don't see a path by which any vaccine is licensed, whether it's emergency use or otherwise, until the third quarter of 2021. So I understand that it could be manufactured several vaccines could be manufactured by the end of the year. I just don't see how you collect enough safety and efficacy data to say that we can have a vaccine for general use by the end of the year.
A man who makes vaccines for a living is telling you, I don't see how you could collect enough data on safety or efficacy to deliver this thing by the end of the year. Keep that in mind. This is a world-renowned scientist. I have been in labs my whole life. I am telling you, I don't see how you could ever collect enough data to make that possible. But lo and behold, we are going into an emergency use with the vaccine, and I think you should think about the fact that he works at Baylor University, and guess who's been funding his little department on vaccines? None other than yours truly, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, to the tune of tens of millions, if not over, here we go, here's one. Gates Foundation commits nearly $70 million to help fight neglected tropical diseases. 4 grants support development of vaccines and better drugs and launch of new medical journal. So these are the types of investments that are going into Dr. Peter Hotez. So what happens when his authority says, I don't care what you said on CNN, I don't care what you said in front of the Congress, we need to move this thing forward, and we're going to give it to people whether we have safety studies or efficacy or not. Now take a look at what he said.
When the Chinese put up the sequence of COVID-19 on bioRxiv in January, the community of coronavirus vaccine researchers looked at this and said, oh, we got this. We know how to make a COVID-19 vaccine. And that's important that people realize that this was not rushed. This was a deliberate, long-term program.
You are the worst kind of human being there is on this planet, Dr. Peter Hotez. I will never, never let you out of the responsibility, because all the way back in January, we all got together. We've been at this a long time, and we knew how quickly this was going to work out. Really, that's interesting, because moments after that, you're screaming at the Congress to slow this thing down, and you're sitting on CNN saying, I don't think we're going to deliver a vaccine that could work before the third quarter of 2021, if ever. So suddenly you have this, this vision that goes all the way back to January, or is it you have no choice because the authority has said, Peter, just flip the button. Go ahead, 450 volts for everyone alive on this planet. We don't care if you have an allergy. We don't care if we've never tested on pregnant women. We don't care if children don't need it. They're going to get it, Peter, and guess who's going to take the fall? You, Peter. We're having the responsibility, but you're to be the one that we remember. This is going on, folks, and we are sitting by and watching it. And if you think, wow, those bad people, I want you to ask yourself every time you put on a mask, every time you do what the authorities are telling you to do, even though you know it's wrong. I have an amazing show today.
Pretty crazy, right? So I know people can look at Peter Hotez and Paul Offit with disgust and say, how dare they? How could they do this? But what about yourself? Right? How does this look in your life? I can tell you how it looks in the doctor's office, okay? Because if you've ever declined a procedure that is suggested because you don't feel it's what's best, sorry, it looks like I'm bleeding a little bit. Anyway, for example, Doc, I've seen harm in my family, and we've done the research, and we've decided to no longer vaccinate because that's what's in the best interest of my family and my kids. Well, we're gonna require that to be a part of our practice. So if you're gonna not do that, then you're gonna have to be kicked out of our practice. Well, why? And here's the kicker. Because when you ask why, they don't go into any of the research about why they believe this. This is the standard answers I've received. Because we stand by the American Academy of Pediatrics, okay? AKA, just following orders, right? There's a hierarchy, always. And the American Academy of Pediatrics follows the CDC or the FDA, right? Well, who actually has any type of liability? Who's going to be held responsible for the damage done? Nobody. Nobody. But what about yourself, right? Like Del said, every time you put on that mask, you're just bowing that knee in obedience to the authority, even though you know it's wrong. Even though you know that this is just a submission and that this is a conditioning. But man, you can say no. You don't have to be afraid to say no. This is a psychological issue that has been studied for a long, long time. Just like he talks about in that experiment with the shocks, okay? This was a study that I posted a long time ago on my Instagram that somebody sent me. I think it was Eliana Raju's Guru. And it's very powerful, right? Obeying orders reduces the vicarious brain activation towards the victim's pain. And that victim may sometimes be yourself, right? You know you're going to feel uncomfortable and that you don't feel right when you put on that mask, but you do it anyway because you're obeying orders. You definitely know you should never be putting it on your kids. So stop obeying these stupid orders that aren't helping anybody. Go look this up and read it, okay? It's really important that you understand psychologically what's going on and the excuse people have in their mind, right? Whether it's law enforcement obeying orders, whether it's doctors following protocol, okay, that are costing people's freedoms and lives. Again, this is from the Journal of Neuroimage called Obeying Orders Reduces Vicarious Brain Activation Towards Victims' Pain. Highlights. Participants inflict more shocks when obeying orders than when freely deciding. You just saw that. Empathy-related regions of the brain are less active when obeying orders compared to acting freely. Okay? This is the key. Take responsibility for your actions and start acting freely. Use your free agency. Coercion, which everyone is under right now. Reduced neurocognitive processes associated with guilt. This is built into the medical system. This is why a pediatrician or any other doctor or nurse can disassociate their orders and action of injecting a patient with toxins, seeing with their own eyes a reaction either later that day or later that week when a patient comes in, and they can disassociate the responsibility and say, no, wasn't the shot. That can't happen. Come back later. Okay? Reduced empathy and guilt-related activation could facilitate harming under orders. Past historical events and experimental research have shown complying with orders from authority has a strong impact on people's behavior. Clearly. Okay? These results highlight that obeying orders has a measurable influence on how people perceive and process others' pain. They completely disassociate from it. Okay, that's a lot of these riots that have happened that have been very violent are actually behind the scenes organized by NGOs that are literally giving people orders to go cause this type of chaos. And when they're following orders, they disassociate from the actions that they're doing. Okay? Same way goes for law enforcement enforcing these stupid mandates that aren't laws on free citizens. And on businesses creating policies saying, well, we're just following orders. This may help explain how people's willingness to perform moral transgressions is altered in coerced situations. Okay, this whole event was planned in a way, in a hierarchical structure, so that orders could be sent down the chain and they knew people would obey. Are you ready to disobey? Anyway, I'm not going to go through this whole thing. I really think you should go read it. I read through it back in December, and it's amazing, and it really helps you recognize your own submission to this coercion in your day-to-day life. Let's just hit the conclusion. Milgram's famous experiment has shown widespread willingness to obey authority. Widespread willingness to obey authority, even to the point of inflicting harm to innocent volunteers. The mechanisms underlying such behavior that is frequently justified by the fact that the person was simply obeying orders and thus did not feel responsible are still largely unexplored despite their high social relevance. Here we have shown that when people accept to comply with the orders of an authority, the neural response associated with the perception of pain felt by another individual is reduced in comparison with being free to choose which action to perform. Crucially, when subjective pain rating indicated that the pain delivered to the other individual appeared less painful when people administered the shock according to the experiment's order than when they could freely decide. We also show that participants' negative feelings and neural guilt signatures were reduced when they comply with orders. These results highlight how obeying an order relaxes our aversion against harming others, despite still being the author of the action that led to the pain. That last sentence is really important. These results highlight how obeying an order relaxes our aversion against harming others, despite still being the author of the action that led to the pain. Okay? So when you're watching protests and law enforcement come in and just start beating down these peaceful protesters, they're obeying orders. They're completely disassociated from it. Not an excuse at all. They are the author of the action that led to the pain, and they should be held accountable for it. The pediatrician should be held accountable for the harm they're causing, and the pharmaceutical companies should be held accountable for the harm they're causing. Parents should be accountable for the harm they're causing by conditioning their kids to be obedient to these authorities that have horrible my mind just went blank, but that their intentions are no good. So stop being obedient when you know deep down that what you're doing is wrong. Okay? Reconnect with the actions you're making. Okay? And your own free agency and free will. And literally disconnect from these orders and look at what you're doing and then decide if it's something you should continue or not. Okay? We are headed down a horrible road. And it's up to us as individuals to stop it by our own actions and by challenging those in authority. All right? Love you guys.